それでは W20 パネル
We'd like to continue on with W20 discussion entitled Closing the Gender Gap for New Prosperity, Enhancing Governance for Women's Empowerment. Today, we have Ms. Isabel de Saint Malo de Alvarado, Vice President and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Panama, Ms. Arancha Gonzalez, Executive Director, International Trade Center, Ms. Ai-Wa Ong, Company Group Chairman, Japanese Johnson, Asia Pacific Johnson Pharmaceutical Companies, and then Ms. Miki Tsusaka, Senior Partner and Managing Director of Boston Consulting. And first, we'd like to invite the Ms. Satsuki Katayama, Minister of State for the Regional Revitalization, Regulatory Reform, Gender and Equality. Please take the floor. May I start? Thank you. I'm Satsuki Katayama. I talked about community issue and then continue on. I will also serve as a member of the closing of the gender gap. I'd like to speak about various policies and also the measures to enhance people's participation in order to enhance the women's empowerment or women's participation. This would lead to the diversity enhancement, and this would be the driving force for the added value. And this would be conducive to the economic growth. That's our strong conviction. Also, furthermore, according to McKinsey, which is a very famous consulting company, if we are able to eliminate the gender divide or disparity, i.e. the differences of the revenue between male and female, we will see the increase of the GDP by $12 trillion. And so Japanese government is looking at this and try to work on the work-style reforms and the increase of the number of the daycare centers and the children's care centers, and also the change of the attitude, which is the elimination of unconscious biases, and also work-life balance, the environment to include that. And then we have the law, which is for the activity enhancement of the females. So we are urging the people to work on the enhancement of the laws, which is based on the laws to promote women participation in society. This is already mandatory for more than 300 cases. And also at the Diet member, we are submitting the bill to change the revised laws to promote women participation in the society. So that means that this will become mandatory for the companies over the number of employees over 101, and for the company to strategically work on the enhancement of the people. Then we have the fourth, basic strategy for the gender equality society. We have the numerical target for the management positions, and also they have to have the implementation activities. And then we have been working on the annual review for that. And this year in June, targeting for June, we will establish major priority policies for the enhancement of the women's participation, which will be reflected onto the budgetary measures for the following year. Abe administration has been focusing on this. Already 6 years have passed since the establishment, since the introduction of Abe administration. It has been steadily working on it. A number of the female workers increased by 2.8 million, and the number of the females who have been are working with the children have risen from 68% to 72%. So that means that the number of the female workers they in the past had to leave their work. So that means that only 40% of them are able to continue working on in the same company. But now, according to the recent study, it is far larger than 50%. So we are at the turning point for the female participation in the society. With this, while the W20 meeting, we'd like to see this as a starting point and to go to the higher place. And we see the increase of the revenues, and this will result in the increase of the tax revenue, and then we'll be able to have the kindergartens and the daycare centers. So this is something we have to work on, which is the creation of the beneficial cycle, and this will be beneficial to everybody, and this also would lead to the elimination of the disparity, and we are able to leave no one behind. And at the same time, we have been working on the fourth industrial revolution. We are now seeing the digitalization of the economy, and the new seeds for the economic growth is already seen here. And we have to work on the human resources development, and then we drive the female workers, the participation. Now people live till the age of 100, and so it is important to work on the recurrent education, in which people are able to be retrained a number of times, and then also to promote females for the managerial position. Prime Minister Abe has issued the request for the business circle. And then also for the securities report, the number of female managers should be stated, and also corporate governance code had been revised, and the diversity is needed and for the corporate board, and the training for the candidate, the female workers are requested. For with this, the female employees would be able to participate in the management, and the governance will be eliminated, and we're quite sure that the transparency would also be eliminated. In the global trend in the capital market is ESG investment. We see the increase of the ESG investment. According to the survey by the Cabinet Office, about 70% of the institutional investors are utilizing the information regarding the participation of the females, because of the fact that this will have an impact for the long-term outcome or performance of the company. So the capital market believe in the female strengths. So the percentage of the females in the managerial positions or executives is something they are focusing on. So clearly they are saying that they are looking at this situation. Gender gap should be eliminated, and the enhancement of the female workers be something indispensable for the country and also companies. So many of the people within the Abe administration, we are very much committed to the promotion of this. So we have the very good panel members, and we would like to ask them to speak about their own experiences and their ideas, and we'd like to reflect that onto our activities. We have many people from all over the nation. Here we have the close connection between global and local, and so we are able to cover the entire part of Japan, so that in June, at the end of June, for the first time in the world, in our history, we will be the hosting country, or we will hold the presidency for G20. So we'd like to pin high hopes on this, and as the minister in charge of the female issue, I'd like to express my sincere congratulations to all of you. Thank you very much.
ございました。
Ms. Katayama, thank you very much. So now I'd like to introduce our moderator, Ms. Angela McKay, Global Publisher, Financial Times Live, FT Live, and Managing Director, Asia Pacific at the Financial Times.
Very much, and thank you, Minister Katayama, for your excellent words. Now, before we frame our conversation and we begin our panel, we've also got a short talk recorded by the Chief of Staff of the OECD, Gabriela Ramos. I hope.
It's coming.
Like Christmas.
They are preparing.
Prime Minister, Minister, members of the W20, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to address this message to the W20 summit and to see that is thriving under the Japanese presidency. And of course, it brings back memories of our hard work to create the W20 in 2015. I still vividly recall in 2014 when I worked with the female Sherpas and with the Japanese Sherpa to advance a gender target for increasing female participation in the workforce by 25% by 2025. I remember many saying that gender equality was not a topic for leaders. Well, we proved them wrong, and the fact that Prime Minister Abe is joining us and endorsing our work today is a proof that we have come a long way. We made the economic case, which speaks for itself. In a report released just last week at the OECD Social Institutions and Gender Index, CIGI, reveals that discrimination in laws, attitudes, and practice is estimated to cost the global economy close to $6 trillion. That is 7.5% of global GDP. It's not minor. And in a time where global growth continues to lose momentum, we cannot afford such losses. Unfortunately, recent OECD work, including groundbreaking reports released early this month, show that progress is extremely slow, and I hope you will be addressing these issues. The gender employment gap still ranges from 5% to 50% across the G20. Some countries, like our host, Japan, had made great progress, but some have actually seen gender inequality increased. These gaps widen, especially when women start a family. Our data shows that childless men and women have a gender employment gap of 5%, but this quadruples to 23% for women and men with at least one child aged 0 to 14. Gender wage gaps also remain substantial, at 17% on average across the G20. The glass ceiling is still in place. Only 5% of Fortune 500 companies have a female CEO, and only 20% of senior corporate positions are held by women, and progress, as I said, is very, very slow. Women continue to take the lion's share, around 75%, of unpaid care and domestic work, keeping them away from education and employment. We also see a significant gender divide in the digital economy. Only 25% of ICT graduates are women, and in G20 countries, only 13% to 32% of ICT specialists are female. And let me tell you, almost 90% of the software that is being developed is developed by teams composed by men only. So all the biases of the analog economy might be getting into all these developments, including the artificial intelligence that we have been producing. We need to rethink the way we are working. These numbers and the fact that they have remained stubbornly stagnant since 2014 is frustrating, given that we know which policies and intervention can help address this. And we know that many countries have taken a lot of measures in these regards. Creating a level playing field for men and women is essential. For example, we know that we must push for a fairer distribution of unpaid care work through dual parental leave schemes, quality and affordable childcare, and greater acceptance of flexible working arrangements. Or using reasonable quotas, leveraging institutional investors and anti-discrimination regulation to improve gender balances in businesses. However, as our analysis shows, these policies will not be effective if we do not eliminate the negative cultural norms, family expectations, and legal barriers that hold women back, including in the media. These barriers can create an environment in which societies, families, and women themselves set low expectations for what they can achieve. And we know girls have less self-confidence. We have measured it. And therefore, how can we expect them to succeed if we have the whole environment telling them that they will not? Public policies can only do so much when, as revealed by our CG report, child marriages continues in 112 countries, and legal discrimination and loopholes prohibit women from entering certain professions in half of the countries around the world. We cannot continue to uphold an environment that both directly limits opportunities for women and also keep women from imagining that anything is possible for them, that allow them to dream that they can achieve whatever they want. We need positive role modeling. We need gender-neutral education tools and textbooks, and we need a strong shift in mindsets. To achieve gender equality, the environment has to change. The cultural norms have to change, and women need to be empowered to demand more. As Prime Minister Abe highlights, we cannot achieve the future we want if half of our population is not empowered to be part of the journey. The G20 will drive the change, and the OECD continues to support you strongly in this endeavor. Count on us, and good luck with your discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining this afternoon. And just to remind you of the title of our panel, it's Closing the Gender Gap for New Prosperity, Enhancing Governance for Women's Empowerment. Before I start, I'm going to hand over to Mickey from BCG in a minute. But before I start, I'd just like to have a quick show of hands. Who of you here have, and this stands obviously for men and women, who here has got a full-time job or a part-time job? Who's in the workforce? Good. And working on a Saturday, excellent. But who here, and this goes for men and women as well, whose mother was working in the workforce, who was in the workforce full-time or part-time? Okay, about half. In the past, when I've taken that poll, it's usually about a quarter if we're in parts of East Asia, and it can go up to about 75% when we're in Western economies. So this is a pretty good result, I think. Our discussion today is going to look at gender mainstreaming strategy. And of course, most of you know that what that is about is embedding gender diversity and the issues around that into every part of an organisation's fibre. So that everybody from the CEO to the security guard understands and knows what gender means to them and how their company is going to try and change the way they operate so that it doesn't matter what your gender is, you've got the same amount of opportunity in your organisation. Now that's very easy to say and write down in my notes, but there's a lot of reality and a lot of data behind that. So to frame our discussion, I've asked Mickey to prepare a couple of comments and hopefully a few slides just to show us about Japan and putting Japan into a global context. Mickey.
Thank you, Angela. スライドお願いいたします。So good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. I was actually here 5 years ago when we started WOW, and it's great to be back to a much bigger room than I think we had the first year, and to be kicked off by our Prime Minister this morning. They've asked me to set Japan in context, so it's a little bit of a report card. Just 4 slides. I'm a consultant. I travel with slides. So I will share some data with you. So the good news, I guess, if you think of a world where men and women are 50-50, if you look at the population, the labor force, employment, and so on, as you see from the graphs, the gap is closing in Japan. And I've picked the 5-year period from the beginning of Abenomics till the full year data that we had. So that's the good news. Now, for those of you that are skeptical, you could focus on the last column, that there is still an 18% wage gap between men and women. More on that a little bit later. So, in terms of the size of the prize, in Japan, during the Abenomics period, we have actually made great progress in female employment. There have been a lot of numbers at the trillion-dollar level in the globe, but in Japan, if we take a bottom-up approach, in terms of the incremental female wages, we have gained 8.8 trillion yen in our economy, over 2.5 million women more working. And then top-down, we have contributed 3 points of GDP, or about 15 trillion yen. So these are big numbers and good numbers. If we break it down a little bit in terms of the bottom up, indeed the 8 trillion is compared to what it would have been had not a single woman joined the workforce since Abenomics started, which is somewhat unrealistic. So that's the line. What I think the last slide that I'll share with you, however, does highlight that there's still more upside. I tend to think of myself as a half-full person, but the half-empty part is what I will share with you now. So I shared with you that since the 5-year period that I looked at the analysis, we have gained 3 points in GDP gain due to female employment in Japan. But many of you know, 2/3 of the women are working part-time and not with full-time jobs. And there's still a labor participation gap, although we have surpassed the United States. So if we just reached OECD levels, that would be 11%. 11 is a better number than 3. So I know that the conversation this afternoon will talk about how do we keep making that number bigger and how do we bring it to action. I think there's been plenty of talk about the economic necessity for gender diversity. We all know that. I think all of our panelists know that. So I think we're ready to start talking about what we do about it. And last but not least, you raised the hand raising reminded me, for most of the women in the OECD nations, on average, 15, 16 hours a week is used on home care, house care, child care. So most women that work have 1.5 jobs at least, and that is probably part of the issue between the 3 and the 11 on this page. Thank you.
Thank you, Miki.
And
and now I'll turn to Tanaka-san from Mitsui & Co. And I must apologize because I think that Tanaka-san is one of the minority here and we've discriminated against him because he doesn't even have a toilet on this floor. So I apologize, but so the stage is yours, sir.
Thank you, Angela, for your nice introduction. I kind of, understand how scary it is to be on the minority side. But anyway, I'm from, typical Japanese big company, and I like to start with, how things are going on in a typical, Japanese setup. We Mitsui have been addressing this gender gap issue since 1990s, and we have had some challenges, and it's been sort of slow and gradual, especially when we make the comparison with the international standard. But we do believe that we have been making some progress. Still challenges, there. But we have basically worked on 2 fronts. The first one is about building the inclusive workplace, and the other is changing mindset, which is the most important part of this game. Just to give you, the number in Mitsui, fresh persons out of college, we employing each year. About 20% are female. 20% is far from 50%, but we think it's a sort of a modest numbers of this moment, given that the number of applicants, female applicants, are about 20%. So at least we can argue that in terms of the probability of success, we are coming sort of even. Mid-management takes some more time for us to, have, abundant, female participation. But at the level of boardroom, we have 16% participation by female, which is not a bad number in, Japanese standard. I said we have been working on 2 fronts. One is the inclusive workplace, and the other is mindset. In terms of inclusive workplace, Mitsui has been quite aggressive in introducing some of those systems that would make things easier for flexible workers, like we have introduced flexible work hours and locations. We can, our employees can make use of sort of telework. And there are quite a good number of participation for the program to support the childbirth and child care leave, these kind of things. What we have found over time was that even though we've created those new systems and rules and regulations for the sake of encouraging, female employees to, participate in our, management responsibility, what we eventually found out was that those child care and, family care is quite popular among male employees. So at least we could say that these were originally introduced for helping females, but actually it's for everyone. That's what we kind of found out.
Okay, well, I think we might stop it there so we can move on. But thank you very much, Naka-san. Ai-hwa, can you tell us a little bit about your company?
Sure. I think all of us heard enough numbers, and the numbers are sizable, and the whys are very clear. Back to Asia Pacific, the day that we can advance women's equality in the workforce, Asia Pacific's GDP would be 4.5, will add another 4.5 trillion itself. So this is another number that give us a reason why and why and why. So for companies like Johnson & Johnson, which is ours, it's also very clear that when we have a more inclusive environment, our financial results are also much better than others, and that has been shown in many of the reports that you see. So within J&J, let me give you a few facts of where it is today. At the top, where the executive members are, more than 30% are women. And very important indicators is also in the middle, which is the people managers. We have 40% managers that are women too. So we are happy, but we're not satisfied, all right? We really want to be able to also start to encourage and also participate in the community to encourage girls to come into STEM. And we have a program called Women in STEM, and we've been very actively involved. And one thing we recognize that we can't do this alone. We have to partner. So we partner with the universities, with the academy to encourage girls to join STEM. And we are committed to having 1 million girls to be able to participate in that program. Just to bring it home a bit for myself, I graduated from biochemistry and microbiology more than 30 years ago. I want to be a perfumer. I applied for a job, and I was rejected because there weren't women perfumer at that time. So, women in STEM is something very close to my heart.
And that is why you smell so nice. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to turn to Arantxa Gonzalez.
This is my third wow. And as I was preparing for this session, I thought, okay, so what can I tell this audience that I haven't said before?
Secrets.
And then I thought, well, maybe I tell them of what happened to me over Christmas. I was doing a radio interview in Spain, that's my home country. And I kept talking about the economic empowerment of women and the importance of the economic empowerment of women. And as I got off the interview, I checked my Twitter account, and there was this guy sending me a message saying, why should I bother? And it occurred to me that what we're not doing well is framing this discussion. This is not, even if this room is full of women, this cannot be a discussion about women talking to women for women.
Yes.
If we are to succeed in eliminating the gender gap that exists in the economy, we have to be very strong at framing this as a question of economic growth for all, for men and women, of sustainability of our growth model, and of inclusiveness of our growth system. So I checked the figures. because I think it's always convincing when you quote figures, right? So in Japan, if this country were to close the gender gap in the economy, if men and women had the same legal but also real economic opportunities, this would mean $13,000 per year per Japanese, men and women. If this was done in Turkey, it would be $9,000. If this was Argentina, it would be $6,000. So what I mean to say with this is that we have to frame this discussion as being win-win. So for those of you who have social media in your hands, please hashtag women's economic empowerment is win-win. It's for men and it's for women. And this is why, and you will allow me, Angela, to make a bit of a shout out.
Yes.
This is why I am very proud that today we have in this room Annette. Annette is Stand Up. Annette is the Executive Director of the Enhanced Integrated Framework. It's a program that works to empower through trade the 47 poorest countries in the world. And she's announcing today in this partnership of which the World Bank, IMF, WTO and ITC and many others are part, that she's committing to spend $10 million in the next 4 years to reach 50,000 women in this 47 poorest country. I think Annette deserves a big applause.
Thank you very much. And now to our final panelist. We've got Isabel de St. Malo de Alvarado, who is the Vice President of Panama.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be in Japan for this 5th WOW conference. And as I've been listening throughout the day to the messages, I can only have hope that we are getting the message across of the importance of this being an effort of the world for the world. And I really loved what you just said, Arantxa, and it's important that we understand that this is not an issue of women's rights, this is not an issue of women's advancement, this is an issue of the world working towards the Sustainable Development Goals with everybody working in the same direction. Let me tell you a little bit about my country. Where I come from, women have been part of the workforce forever. Actually, for many years in Panama, more women graduate from universities than men for the past 20 years. And as women are in the workforce in Panama, in the private sector, in the public sector, once you start looking at the decision-making levels, then the decrease begins. So women are there, but there is the glass ceiling that does not allow women to participate of the decision-making at private companies, in the public sector, and then again, economics. Who makes the purchasing decisions at home? But then we have in corporations, male alone or mostly making the decisions about products, about innovation. So it's an issue there of economics as well. In Panama, we have been pushing this agenda. We've joined many global efforts, regional efforts, and national efforts. We have approved the legislation a couple of years ago that allows for at least 30% women at the boards of directors of government companies and regulated companies in Panama as well, even though women are probably 50% in the workforce. You will find that boards of directors, there is 10%, maybe. And this cannot happen. So with this legislation, we're hoping to push that forward. We're working very hard on equal pay. And we have discovered that as corporations commit to equal pay, they begin analyzing their numbers, and they realize that even though they thought that, oh yes, in my company, men and women get the same pay for the same job, when you really start looking, it's not true. But mostly they don't know it. So we need to make a conscience also of the importance of really looking at the numbers. So I'm very glad to be here. I would say that this situation in Panama is very similar to the rest of Latin America, to the rest of our region, and we are truly committed to continue pushing this agenda forward locally and globally. Thank you very much.
Thank you. One of the things that we've talked about this morning, a little on some of the panels, but we were talking about it in our meeting just before we came on stage, is unconscious bias. And what that means for companies. And each one of us here, even though we would like to think that we are squeaky clean and lily white, we all have at least 1, 2 dozens of examples of unconscious bias in our own personality. Many companies think that a couple of hours of training one day will eradicate it with one fell swoop. That's not the case. It has to be embedded into the company. It's one of those gender mainstreaming issues that we are looking at today. So who would like to just start off with that? What have you done in your companies, your organisation about unconscious bias, and how are you improving, not improving? What's happened for you lately? Anyone start?
So I'm happy to start.
Good.
Let me talk about the world at large and bring it back to VCG. So we did publish a report around the World Economic Forum called the Fixing the Flawed Approach to Diversity. And as you say, we interviewed thousands of people around the world. 96 to 98% of corporations now around the world have some sort of diversity effort. When you ask the people that are affected, and this one was actually not just women, but minorities, LGBTQ, different nationalities, only a quarter of them in that minority group felt that these efforts actually helped them, which is a shocking statistic. There's a lot of money going into training, whether it's unconscious bias training or diversity training, but it's not making it through. And so our thesis is really that the things that really matter, we might as well ask the people that are affected, whether it's working dads and moms. They want things like flexibility. They want to see role models that actually are succeeding as a diverse member of that population. In terms of our firm, we're very happy that a third of our executive committee, which I was a member of, is female, and a quarter of our leadership is female. I'd like to see that number double, but I think you can tell the boys too, I guess. But I do think that it is something that we all have to work on every day, but it starts at the top, and the top sets the tone. And as the one gentleman on the stage said, it is much more about a change management mindset at the top than anything else. And you have to start 1% at a time and measure it.
Perhaps that a good example of that this morning was the presentation by Otami-san from Shiseido. He's the CEO of the company who has embraced this mantra, this whole change management, and then it is diffusing quite successfully throughout the company. What's happening with you?
I'd like to build on that. You know, totally agree. You know, the tone from the top, the role models are all very, very important. We have done a lot of training because many of us don't even know it exists because it's unconscious. I can't be biased, come on, you know. So we've done really a lot of very systematic structured training to raise the awareness that it exists in everybody. It is nothing to do with gender, background, religion, age. It's just part and parcel of human. And I think that's important because that raises the awareness and that raises that consciousness. Then it helps people to know how to be aware of it. How do you overcome? Because unconscious bias is very person-specific. It's depending on your background. So that's one. And what we also have realized that, building on Miki's point about role modeling and the ecosystem, we do have many chapters in every market of women's leadership. We had also started Open and Out, which is a chapter for LGBT, and it actually further reinforced each other in terms of helping people to understand diversity and inclusiveness. So this actually add on, it does not, take away attention from either one of them. So I think our learning is diversity becomes much higher and the unconscious biasness becomes a lot more in the minds of each one of us working in the organization.
Arantxa, you gave a very good example, to you after, but Arantxa, you have a very funny, we're not going to mention names, but a very funny example that was happened to you recently. Do you want to share that with our audience?
Yeah, but you know, walking in the room, I thought of a better one.
Good.
I thought of the unconscious bias in the Financial Times. You know, when I read the Financial Times every day, like many of us in this room, and when I read about central bankers hiking rates, the comment, always a man. If I read about trade wars, the comment, always a man. If I hear about a currency crisis in a country, the quote, whom does this journalist checking with? He checks with another man. So it's an unconscious bias. I'm conscious about this because, I would not go to the extreme of saying that every journalist is consciously trying to suppress the views of women economists, women central bankers, women experts on trade, women experts of climate change. There are thousands, millions of them around the world. It's simply that these people are not visible. So we are going to do something in the International Trade Center about that. On the 4th of July, we are publishing a collection of essays from 30 amazing women from across the world. Some you will know, some you don't know. Some are young, some are less young. Some are from the north, some are from the south. They all have in common, they are amazing specialists in the economy and finance. So we are going to have a book published not about women's economic empowerment, but having women talk about the economy, so that we do exactly what you were saying, render these women visible to the rest of the world. They are there. So maybe next time we will see more quotes from these amazing women in the Financial Times.
Well, I know that you're a fan because you're wearing a lot of pink today, and that's what my newspaper's printed on pink paper. But this is a realization that our own journalists and our own people have made, and we've developed something called the Janet Bot, and it's named after Janet Yellen, the former head of the Fed in the US, and it calculates how many times we quote women around economics and finance versus men. Let me tell you, it used to be really bad. I'm sure if you were to go back now and compare last year from this year, it's improved, but it's still not great. It's still not good enough for us. So yeah, it does take a lot of conscious work. So that's something that we have introduced ourselves to keep an eye on, to do our own policing. But it's nice that you police us as well, yeah. Isabel.
If I may, I think that as we think about unconscious bias, we need to talk about discrimination. Because the fact is that one thing is linked to the other. And there is, of course, unconscious bias regarding gender, as there is unconscious bias regarding race and regarding sexual orientation. And as you look at the different days that are established to make awareness of how disabilities are not different. But we need to take this into action more than with talking about it, which is very important. We need to continue to talk about it and raise awareness around the issues. But if managers, as they define objectives regarding sales and they set targets, they were to define objectives within their corporations regarding biases and set targets, I think that's the way to go. I think we need to deal with this the same way that we deal with other objectives. We're going to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. What are the targets? What are the objectives? What are the results? How do we measure against them? There's got to be a way of identifying these biases that we find at home, at the workplace, at the school. We find them everywhere. As much as, some years ago, perhaps girls playing football was rarer than it is today. Maybe it's still rarer than seeing a boy play football. But those things are there as they are in the workforce, and I do believe that we need to find a way to identify specific targets and work towards them, because habits are what can break the unconscious bias. Habits by leaders and mainstreaming. And one way of mainstreaming is by making it very visible what the objectives are and how we're going to work towards them.
That reminds me of BHP, one of the world's biggest mining companies. 2 years ago, they made a commitment that 50% they would have gender parity in the workforce by 2025. And when you think about mining and the kind of graduates they take and the kind of tasks that they have, that's a pretty big call. And they've completely changed the way that they are recruiting not just people from university, but also people who come in to work as to study trades. So that's a really interesting experiment that I hope becomes a reality. Tanaka-san, I know that Mitsui has set some goals as well. You are planning to have 3 times the number of women in senior management by 2020. How are you going with those goals?
Well, the target itself is already fulfilled. So, I think it's high time that we would, stretch out and, put another target.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to reveal your target here? We'd love a scoop.
Please don't put me in a difficult position. I think that, this unconscious bias is something, we have to work very carefully. Of course, the management at the top level makes some difference, but I do not really think it's fair to sort of anticipate that we can solve this problem overnight. This is a time-consuming thing, and any types of discriminations, minority issues, these takes time. For one thing, the management, the continuous commitment at the top level makes some difference. And also, I'm kind of optimistic about the younger generations because they tend to have sort of, more liberal mindset. What happens is then, at the middle management level, they would be sort of stuck in between and, they don't go anywhere. I think it makes sense, for leaders to do some small mentorship because the essence of the problem is that, we do run short of a good number of role models. If we have got, a sizable number of role models and we sort of, achieve the critical mass, things will change quite dramatically. For Mitsui, I think the time might come within several years, but I am now doing my small part of mentorship to some of the good and talented female managers.
Now that's an interesting topic, mentorship versus sponsorship. Personally, my career has been built on a couple of very good sponsors who have shepherded me and pushed me into jobs when I felt maybe I didn't have the confidence to do it. Funnily enough, they were both men. But others think that mentorship, continuous mentorship, is the way to go. But I think that sponsorship, your sponsor is putting their reputation on the line by saying that I believe in this person. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, mentorship versus sponsorship?
Go ahead.
You're the vice president, you get to go.
Yes, of course.
No, I think both are really important. And I think that men need to be sponsors and mentors as women need to be sponsors and mentors. And I would like to emphasize this because, as you were saying earlier, how do we make this an effort, a global effort, and an effort where both men and women jump in? It's not clear, and I heard once somebody say, and I'll repeat this because I was really impacted by it. There's got to be a place in hell for women that do not support the women. When I heard that, I was like, wow, I remember the discussions in Panama when we were pushing for a legislation for parental leave. It was horrible. The opposition was horrible. We managed the amazing 3 days for parental leave. But the discussion was horrible, and as I listened to women argue against parental leave, I couldn't believe it. So we need to have sponsors for this cause, and we need to have mentors for this cause. Men and women for women, and men and women for men to become part of the effort, because once again, it's an effort not for justice. It's an effort for development and an effort for advancing faster forward in terms of just better livelihoods for everybody.
Thank you.
Sure. Can't agree more, Vice Minister. Both are important, and both genders doing both very meaningful contribution is equally important. The difference, in my mind, because I have benefited from sponsorships myself. for women to rise up in a corporate and really it's true, it's a global slate of contest. You need to work very hard. We all know you need to have capabilities that you need to accumulate and learn all the time. But a very important part of my life is sponsorship. Because sponsorship is whenever there is a discussion of where this opportunity should go, there's no perfect candidate. There's always counter-argument for every candidate it is. But the sponsors who sponsors you will stand up and make the argument for you. And it's important to have sponsors to reach that equality because that discussion is never easy. And that discussion itself, I would say, is what the sponsors make versus a mentor. And we always need mentor because it's life skill, right? You need somebody to coach. But the person who's going to fight for that equality, be it gender, be it diversity, which is also has LGBT, and also geographical, because a global corporation, you need to have geographical leaders, global leaders as well. So all this requires enormous sponsorship to ensure that the global corporation has the right diversity of representation at the leadership level.
Mickey.
Can I build on that? And Vice President, that quote, I love that quote about women not helping women. We had looked at an industry.
Yes.
We had looked in an industry that you would think there would be more women, like cosmetics, in the United States. And this is over a decade ago, and I think the data has probably improved. But if you look at that industry, because we're 80-90% of the consumers, even that industry doesn't have a lot of women at the top. So when we analyzed the HR data, it was very interesting. There's one thing that I expected, one thing that I didn't. The one thing that I expected is actually women, for example, in that industry, many of them enter in marketing. And that's a specific function. And to rise above, you need the sponsors that pull you up from different parts of the organization in a corporate world. You can be expert, but if you want to be a broader-based manager, you need those additional capabilities. So that made sense to us, saying, okay, cross-training in any industry. Men and women make for better general managers. The other piece, though, was that women, frankly, were harsher on the younger women coming up in terms of evaluations. So I say, well, I have 3 kids. I went back to work after 12 weeks. What are you doing? You know, the older generation, many of us feel, and I am a part of the older generation, we feel like we've gotten here. And so we're a little bit harsher on the next generation, and I don't think that's right. And meanwhile, men are told diversity is important. So sometimes they're a little bit too easy. And so the data was quite compelling, and I think we need to adjust because at the end of the day, as you said, Ananta, it is men and women. It's he for she for he. We all have to help each other to get better. But there are some, the darker side of this whole diversity discussion, and if we don't do it right, we will have the wrong people promoted, and the sponsorships going for the wrong reason. I think capability has to come with that leadership right that we get to sit at the table.
Another poll for the audience. Who believes in quotas that are mandatory versus voluntary change within companies, particularly on matters like diversity? So who thinks it's more appropriate to have legislation that mandates quotas? A lot of libertarians out in the audience today.
It's quotas, right? Not targets.
Yeah, quotas.
Can I build on that?
Yeah, just sure. What do you think?
I never believed in quotas before. Right. I was fully against quotas, thinking that we had the experience, capabilities, why would we need a quota to get anywhere? Today, I am convinced that quotas are part of the way forward, at least for now. I am sure, and I hope that at some point we won't need them, but unless we have quotas, we're just not going to advance fast enough. I heard Christine Lagarde of the IMF say last year in Davos that if a girl were born today, it would take her 170 years to live in a gender-balanced world. 170 years. I mean, who can wait 170 years? So, I mean, it's not even worth to count. So I do believe that quotas are not necessarily better, and I hope that they're not there forever. But we're just not advancing fast enough. And quotas, I am certain today that are the way to go.
And what are you telling what do your member states think?
You know, you framed the question as, are quotas the most appropriate? No, it's not the most appropriate, but yes, it's the most effective. I mean, we have a market failure. You know, just like you. When I was young, I mean, quotas, why would I want to be boxed in the category? But what I've come to realize is that if you do not have a mechanism to ensure that you get to results, and that these results are achieved, and quotas are a way to get to these results and getting these results achieved, then we are not moving. We are just discussing whether quotas are important or not instead of doing it. So for me, it's pretty clear. We set a target. We can call it a quota. We can call it a target. We can call it a soft target. I'm okay with that. But we fix an objective and we get to work on that objective. Look at what the UN Secretary General did when he came. He said there is not enough women. I mean, we preach in the UN, we preach gender equality. We are the guardians of gender equality. And yet, if you look at international organizations, you do not have enough women at the top. You do not have women at the top of the organization, but at the top of the grades within the organization. So let's put our house in order. So what he did is, he did a plan, and he obliged each and every one of us to get to results. And he measures these results. Now, you call this quota, fine with me. You call this target, fine with me. But you get to results. That's what matters at the end of the day.
So basically, what's measured gets done. But how are you rewarded for that? You get to keep your job, or do you get a bonus? Does he reward the people in the UN for hitting those targets and quotas?
You know, incentive mechanisms work differently. In the UN, the incentive mechanism is not a bonus or a package. In the UN, it works a little bit more with name and shame. So he is showcasing those that are doing it, and he is basically not showcasing those that are not doing it. And you know, it gets visible. So, you know, where you have to use the incentive mechanisms that you have at your disposal. Now, in the case of, you know, a big investment bank, probably you could do this with bonuses. But I just believe at the end of the day, you know, we do these things because we believe this is what we have to do. We don't do these things because we're going to be rewarded or because we are going to be chastised. We do this because it is the right thing to do. And not only because it's legal or it is smart, what do we want at the end of the day? We want, through diversity, we want strength. So if we want strength, diversity is an essential ingredient. Strength in the economy, strength in our societies, strength in our communities. That is what diversity gives us. So we have to believe, at the end of the day, this discussion has to be about convincing people that this is the objective we all want to pursue.
So thank you, that was great. But what can we do that's practical? I mean, we all feel very passionately about this topic. You know, WOW is been working hard for 5 years. But what are we going to do that's going to really move the dial? That's why I'm always interested about in mandatory targets or quotas, because it means that there is a stick that people get hit with. I mean, how else are we going to really make people embrace this change? I mean, clearly, it's going to be if the leadership of organisations and companies take it on. But what is going to be the thing that's going to push people through that final barrier? Mickey, have you got any research on that? You've got research on everything.
Well,
that's a hard question.
So, you know, this question about is diversity good? Yes, it's so obvious to many of us on the panel and the room. I can't answer it because it's maybe so obvious, but I think again, I can't speak to nations or other kinds of large organizations I'm less familiar with, but in the corporate context, the numbers are so compelling. So if I bring it back to Japan and you compare the companies some that have been mentioned, you know, with high performance versus low performance, there is a correlation There's a 5-10 point difference in EBITDA and ROE of Japanese top 2,000 companies. You look at who has female board members, most of them didn't. Now, is that correlation, causality? I don't know. But would I rather be a CEO at a leading company knowing that I'm getting my fair share or even more than fair share of the female talent pool in a country that's population is declining? We are amongst the lowest in terms of productivity compared to OECD nations. That data is right there, so I would rather be in the winning team, and the winning team has to have diversity of all kinds. And so, I'm sorry, it's probably not this is what you do Monday, but I have a lot of data I'm happy to share with anybody. But it is very compelling economics. That competitive advantage resides with those that take this seriously and take it to action, like some of the companies
and I'll throw to you. We had an interview in the Financial Times recently with a CEO and chairman. He was both of the same company. And he said that I don't need to have diversity because I've had double-digit growth since I took the helm, and it's absolutely unnecessary and it's going to waste money. My stakeholders don't want me to waste money. And fortunately, I had a shareholder that stood up at the shareholders meeting and said, but you don't know what you're missing. You're doing very well, but what happens if you're missing out on, instead of having 11% growth, you could be having 18% growth. Where is the benefit to your stakeholders there? Anyway, apparently he was quite embarrassed and didn't really answer the question. That was great.
I also don't want to make it just about money making, because there's also very compelling data that, frankly, the fund managers around the world, including the large Japanese pension funds, have realized long ago that there is no trade-off between doing good versus doing well. So if you look at shareholder return and you look at total societal impact, your compliance with SDGs and whatnot, and again, it's very hard for any typical corporation to do all 19, but you pick a few, there's definite correlation. And again, even if it's in causality, I'd rather be on that side of the count versus the other.
Isabel?
I wanted to refer to the other side that needs to happen for these targets and objectives to happen, and it's the issue of what happens at home. Unless women really are able to share the workload at home, this is going to be very difficult, because corporations can have the possibilities, can have the targets, but it needs to make sense personally. And there, at home, there are also advantages to sharing the workload. And I say this because I think many times, and I speak for myself, women, we are responsible as well for not sharing I experience it personally. I mean, my husband has always been very present and very there, but I always assumed
that you could do it better. That's what I always assumed.
In my mind, well, probably yes, but no, in my mind that was the way it was supposed to happen until I got into politics and my balance was completely lost, and I just found that my husband gladly takes the children to the doctor or whatever. But the thing is that at home, fathers might be missing out on what upbringing means, on what sharing the work, the home work load, on taking care of the elderly. And there is also a lot of gains for a father that has the opportunity to spend more time with the children because there's a necessity for them to do so. And I think there are responsibilities for men, there are responsibilities for women, and we need to make that work. We need to ensure that there are the teamwork, the places for care, and that there is the effort, the partner effort at home, so that women can do this. I mean, because if not, it's just impossible. You cannot have the double work shift every day. And it happens to most women in many, many places. That's a reality, and it's just too hard.
I know, Tanaka-san, you were saying that it's probably a bit too late in our generation, but you were saying that you thought millennials were very candid about the change that they want and how they want to have a different kind of work life. I mean, how is Mitsui dealing with that?
One of the things we observe is that as I have already mentioned, all of these systems we've created to, make it more flexible, doesn't only benefit the female but also male workers. And I think that in their mind, the priority and balance of things are a bit different. We were living in the corporate world where we do long hour work. Working long hours was sort of the expression of your commitment to the job. That was in my age. But nowadays, people are more, frank about what he can do and what he wants to do, or he or she. And instead of trying to show their commitment through long work hours, they would just like to deliver good quality and timely service of products, and I think that's good enough. So it may take time, but millennials, taking more share of the labor market. And it will change the situation slowly, gradually, but uninterruptedly.
Yeah. I think we're being wound up a bit, but let's just see if anyone's got had a brain bang on stage. Is there anything that you would like to say that kind of sums up our discussion today, or what you might think was the most important element of it?
No, to me, it's basically understanding that there is not one button we can push to fix this problem, and that this will not be fixed in the short term. That what we need to understand is the specific circumstances of every country, of every company, of every society. In this country, in my view, the biggest barrier today is a cultural one. And this is why I applaud the efforts of the Prime Minister to, through WOW, render this issue visible to the rest of the Japanese community. In a country like Rwanda that has 68% women parliamentarians, this is not the problem. The problem is probably on the digital divide. In another country, it's probably going to be violence against women. So every country needs to understand what it needs to fix and with which order of priority, and get on to work on it. Understanding that it's team effort, everybody, men and women, all together.
Wow, that's a pretty good note to end on. Thank you very much to my wonderful panel. Your thoughts, very creative. I even take the criticism there of the FT. Welcome for your thoughts, and I hope everyone goes away with some stimulating ideas that you can think about implementing in your home or in your work. Thank you very much.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. We had the honor of having these renowned people. We had the representative. This is Angela Mackey, the global publisher, Financial Times. Gabriel Ramos, but Isabel Descent, from the Foreign Affairs of Panama. The Bracha Gonzalez, the executive director, International Trade Center. Aihua On, a company group chairman, Johnson, Asia Pacific, Miki Zasaka, and also Mr. President Tanaka of the Mitsui and Company. Thank you so much.